Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another true crime video. Today's case brings us to Canton, Massachusetts, about 20 miles south of Boston, where 23-year-old Sandra Birchmore was found dead in her apartment on February 4th, 2021. Sandra's death was originally ruled to be self-inflicted, but former Stoughton police officer Matthew Farwell has recently been charged in Sandra's death, and prosecutors allege that he used his experience and his training as a detective to come up with a plan to murder Sandra during a snowstorm, so it would be a few days before her body was found. Farwell then allegedly staged Sandra's body and apartment to look as if she'd taken her own life. But why did he do this? Why would he do this? What reason or motive would a married father, who at that time was actively working as a police officer, why would he take the life of a 20-something teacher's aide? What reason would someone like Sandra Birchmore and someone like Matthew Farwell even have to know each other or to be in each other's lives? And that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'll just say that it's quite a tangled web we weave when we practice to deceive. This case went places that personally I didn't expect. And we're going to talk all about that after a word from today's sponsor, Factor. I'm coming up to my very busy time of the year, with Halloween fast approaching and the holidays coming one right after the other. I'm really looking for any place that I can save time and make life easier in any way I possibly can. And that's where Factor comes in. Factor delivers fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved, and chef-crafted meals right to your door, and they're ready to eat in just 2 minutes. I'm not being hyperbolic or exaggerating. 2 minutes. And with over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan, veggie, and more, Factor takes the stress out of meal planning and helps you set up for success. Factor meals eliminate the hassle of prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. All you have to do is heat and savor the good stuff. And they don't just have meals. They've got tons of other options, from delicious juices, smoothies, small bites, and more. So you can have your snacks covered as well as your meals. And I know that, ordering something to go or, grabbing takeout really quick and coming home seems easy and seems convenient. But honestly, Factor is cheaper and far more delicious. And they use premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, truffle butter, broccolini. I love broccolini, by the way, and asparagus. The meals are restaurant quality, but you don't even have to leave your house and they're ready to eat in 2 minutes. I want to remind you of that again because it's a big deal for me. 2 minutes. And you have in your hands a delicious, hearty, and nutritious meal that you're going to enjoy every bite of. So a few days ago, I heated up a Factor meal, sun-dried tomato and chicken with zucchini noodles. And when I tell you I do not like zucchini, I've never liked zucchini, I was like, I'm not going to like this. But then I was like, listen, Stephanie, you're not 12. You've liked everything else Factor has sent you. Give it a try. It was so delicious. And can I tell you what the favorite part of the meal ended up being for me? It was the zucchini noodles. They're so good. I'm a zucchini noodle fan now, at least if those zucchini noodles are coming from Factor. And Factor is there to make your life easier, right? So they're going to work with you. You're going to call the shots, and you can change up your order every week, whether you want a plan that gives you 4 meals per week to 18 meals per week. You can also pause or reschedule your deliveries anytime if you need to accommodate for being out of town, or maybe you have a special event, a vacation, work trip, whatever life throws at you. I also love that Factor is a very sustainable choice. They offset 100% of delivery emissions, and they source 100% renewable electricity for the production sites and offices, which is awesome. I love a Factor, yes, for the convenience and the quickness, but also because their meals and snacks just taste really good, which makes using them an overall enjoyable experience. And I find myself looking forward to stepping away from my desk and devouring a Factor meal because A, I know it's not going to take long and I can get back into my hyper-focus mode quickly, and B, I know it's just going to taste good. I'm going to feel great afterwards. And I have a little mini fridge in my office, so if I don't feel like having a full meal, Factor has these amazing juices. Oh my God, these juices are so good. And I have these in my mini fridge. I highly suggest trying the cold pressed variety pack for the juices to get started because I loved every single one of them and I didn't think I was going to. My favorite was probably the apple, beet, and ginger. I don't like beets generally, but once again, this was so good. And these are all good things for you. Beets, ginger's so good. So it was delicious. But I also surprised myself, and I'm a huge fan of the pineapple, turmeric, and basil cold pressed juice. It is so good. These flavors, I didn't think that the turmeric and the pineapple would go well together. I like basil on anything. but it's like this perfect combination of flavors that makes this juice not only so great for me, but it just tastes good and it's an enjoyable experience. And you too can experience the ease and quality of Factor. All you have to do is head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code stephanieharlowe50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders, which is a great deal. Once again, factor75.com. That's code stephanieharlowe50. There's an E at the end of Stephanie and Harlowe to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. Thank you so much to Factor for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. Sandra Birchmore, she had a tough childhood. She was raised by her mother and her grandmother, and she lost them both at a pretty young age. She was also dealing with mental health issues throughout her young life and into her adulthood. Sandra searched for and found what she thought was a safe place to provide community support for her and to teach her how to do some good in the world, and that was the Stoughton Police Department's Explorer program. The Explorers program, started decades ago by the Boy Scouts of America, is geared towards young people between the ages of 14 and 20, and the program has worked with thousands of local, regional, and national businesses and organizations. The website says, quote, "Exploring is based on a unique and dynamic relationship between youth and the organizations in their communities," end quote. The Law Enforcement Explorers program provides young people with an introduction to a career in law enforcement, and it's intended to strengthen ties between the community and the police. At face value, this actually sounds like a great program and a smart way to get kids focused on responsibility to themselves and their communities early on. But of course, like any well-intentioned program, the Explorers have been the focus of controversy and scandal over the years. We're going to talk about that in a bit, but we need to talk about Sandra Birchmore first and her introduction to the program. Sandra reportedly joined the program because she was looking for some direction in life, and also because she had a deep respect and admiration for police officers and other law enforcement personnel. In March of 2010, a 12-year-old Sandra applied to be a participant in the Police Explorers in Stoughton, Massachusetts, and she remained in the program from the spring of 2010 until the fall of 2016. While in that program, Sandra was introduced to several people, including veteran police officer Robert Devine, who ran the program, as well as twin brothers Matthew and William Farwell, who were both police officers and ended up both being mentors in the program, even though before they were police officers and before they were mentors, they were just participants, teen participants like Sandra herself. Now, Matthew Farwell had been a sworn officer with the Wellesley Police Department since 2008. But before that, like I said, he and his brother had both been participants in the Explorer program. And on March 27, 2012, Matthew Farwell became a Stoughton police officer and served as a Police Explorers volunteer, where he had several roles as an instructor, which included teaching firearm and explosive safety and conducting canine demonstrations. Reportedly, Sandra met both Matthew and William Farwell when she was just 13. And from there, at some point, it's believed when Sandra was 15, she began a sexual relationship with a then 27-year-old Matthew Farwell. The prosecution claims that in the 2 years between meeting and beginning sexual contact, Matthew Farwell manipulated and groomed Sandra, and then the two carried on a relationship for the next decade until Sandra became pregnant and then turned up dead. Now, I remember following this case when it first happened, but in the past few months, a ton of information has been released and a more comprehensive and shocking timeline has become crystal clear. This timeline is based on electronic evidence from cell phones and social media, police reports and eyewitness statements from those who knew Sandra Birchmore and Matthew Farwell. On October 28, 2012, Matthew Farwell sent Sandra a Facebook friend request. And according to some of Sandra's family members, when she was a young teenager and a freshman in high school during the 2012-2013 school year, Matthew Farwell would meet up with Sandra and help her with her homework, sometimes in the library. It's believed, based on pretty solid evidence, that Matthew Farwell took Sandra's virginity on April 10, 2013. And this is based on a lot of evidence from text messages between Sandra and Matthew, as well as messages Sandra sent to others. As the years passed, Sandra and Farwell would reminisce about how their relationship started. Often. They would reminisce often. On February 21st, 2019, Sandra told Farwell that she was happy that he'd been the one to take her virginity, and he responded later in the conversation that it was, quote, a big thing to get to be the first, end quote. In that same conversation, Matthew Farwell reminded Sandra about the first time he had digitally penetrated her. And he asked her if she would have done it if he'd told her that he wanted to have sex with her that day. And Sandra replied yes. She would have told him that they could have sex after school. because remember, she's in high school. And she also talked about remembering the exact high school class and the exact specific desk that she was sitting at when she realized she was going to lose her virginity to a much older Matthew Farwell. On March 19th of 2019, texts from Farwell to Sandra asked, quote, "What would you have done if we never used a condom and I never pulled out?" End quote. And Sandra responded that she still would have finished high school. Now, it's not clear, but I believe this was in reference to the idea that unprotected sex may have led to a pregnancy, which Sandra felt would not have impeded her ability to still graduate from high school if she didn't terminate the pregnancy. On June 17th, 2019, Sandra and Farwell talked about how he had helped Sandra test prep at the library, and Farwell told Sandra that she should have let him know she was interested in him and that she wanted to have sex that day, asking her, quote, "Did you think I wouldn't want to fuck you?" End quote. Sandra replied, quote, "Yes, and 'cause of my age, I didn't want you to be like, ugh, no, WTF," end quote, to which Matthew Farwell responded, quote, "I understand that," end quote. Oh, he understands that. He understands that, a kid in high school would think that it was weird, or that a grown man in his late 20s might think it's weird to engage in an inappropriate sexual relationship. I'm glad he's so understanding. On February 11th, 2020, Sandra and Matthew talked again about the day she had lost her virginity to him. And in this conversation, Sandra actually gives a specific date of when this happened. She said, quote, "I had butterflies so bad the day you took my virginity," end quote. Farwell replied back, quote, "Me too, it was such a big day," end quote. And then Sandra told him she still remembered the exact day to this day, and Farwell asked her, "Really?" And she replied, "Yes," to which he sent a smiley face emoji. Sandra Birchmore said, quote, "That's not a date I'll ever forget. It was April 10th, 2013, end quote. Now, Matthew Farwell doesn't say back, "No way. It definitely wasn't that time. It definitely wasn't that soon. You would have been way too young." No. Instead, he responded with another smiley face emoji, to which Sandra replied, quote, "Best day of my life," and included a heart-faced emoji. Now, it seems that not only were the two having regular sexual encounters, even when Matthew Farwell was on the clock with the Stoughton Police Department, but given the age difference and the uneven power dynamics, it didn't seem to be the most non-toxic sexual relationship. Now, remember, I said given the age and the uneven power dynamics, specifically the age, because I don't want anybody to think that I'm shaming anybody for what you do with your age-appropriate consensual partner in the privacy of your own home, in the privacy of your own bedroom, or honestly, wherever you like to get it on. I am not shaming it at all. Whatever gets your flame roaring, you need to do that as long as your partner's okay with it and they are old enough to where it's not absolutely creepy. Given the fact that Matthew Farwell was so much older than Sandra Birchmore, and given the fact that he was her mentor in a law enforcement program, that's what makes this kind of toxic. Matthew Farwell seemed to get off on the idea of having sex with young girls, and not just any sex, but very rough and demeaning sex, during which he gets to do one of his favorite things, which is choking and strangling. There's a lot of role-playing and a lot of violence in the relations between Sandra and Farwell. There was a big sense of Farwell being in the controlled and upper-handed position, and he seemed to get off on the control that he held over a much younger Sandra. Entries from Sandra Birchmore's journal between 2013 and 2020 remark on Matthew Farwell using sex as a weapon. The arrest affidavit says, quote, "Farwell would engage in forceful oral, vaginal, and anal sex acts to punish her for mistakes such as getting bad grades, having intercourse with other people, and failing to share her cell phone location with him," end quote. On March 7th, 2019, Matthew Farwell texted Sandra, quote, "You would have to take a serious pounding to make me happy," end quote. And Sandra asked Farwell if it was for everything. Am I taking a serious pounding and being punished for everything? And he replied, quote, "No, you owe me 3. I'll give you a break and spread them out," end quote. Sandra said, quote, "Please, not all the same day," end quote. And Farwell wrote back, quote, "No, I'll give you like a week so you can feel it. And then as soon as it goes away, you'll get it again, so you feel it for like a whole month," end quote. Sandra said, quote, "Not going to be a fun month," end quote. And Farwell wrote back, quote, "Not for you." Another text conversation in November of 2020 included Matthew Farwell telling Sandra how much he enjoyed having sex with her, and when Sandra asked what she could do for him that he would like more, how could she be better for him, or how could she be perfect for him, he replied, quote, "You say no and make me take it. Full R word," end quote. Sandra told Farwell that she was open to that, and he replied, quote, "Doesn't matter. I'll do whatever I want anyways," end quote. I don't have to explain to you guys what full R word means, right? And he actually said full R word. He didn't say the word. He said full R word. And I kind of feel like if you're role playing and this is something that you want to do and you're interested in and you can't even say the word in a role playing kind of situation, there's a level of shame there that you probably feel about it, which should maybe tell you something. You know what I mean? Like the fact that you're an almost 30-year-old man doing this with a teenage girl, I think that deep in your heart, in your head, in your soul, whatever it is that speaks to you from a universal perspective and not from a selfish, singular-minded perspective, something was telling you, Matthew Farwell, that this was probably not right. So the previous month, before this conversation, Farwell had asked Sandra to call him Daddy during sex, which, I mean, is kind of accurate because he was old enough, technically, to be her father. And he told her that Daddy was going to engage in anal sex with her. And he told Sandra that he was going to grab her hair, pull her head back, and tell her to, quote, "Keep her fucking mouth shut," end quote. And as I said, Matthew Farwell was very much into choking and strangulation during sex, but it didn't seem to be the fun, erotic kind. It seemed that there was something much darker and deeper going on behind Farwell's urge to wrap his hands around the throat of a woman. On October 15th, 2020, Farwell texted Sandra that when they had sex now, he was going to grab her throat and say, "Shut the fuck up," and if she didn't, he wasn't going to pull out. The following month, on November 13th, 2020, Farwell texted, quote, "Maybe I'll hold you down by your throat while I pound you," end quote. And he asked her how tight he should squeeze when he was choking her because he wanted Sandra to feel like, quote, "OMG, this is really happening and I can't stop it," end quote. Like I said, I know a lot of people in adult consensual relationships find this kind of thing to be fun and pleasurable when they can trust their partner and they don't feel fear that it's going to go too far. But according to Matthew Farwell's Google searches, the idea of it going too far was very appealing to him. Located in his iCloud account, law enforcement found several memes that he had screenshotted and saved. One meme said, quote, "What does a pulse and an orgasm have in common? I don't care if she has either," end quote. That's what the meme said. Another meme said, quote, "If you fuck a corpse on a waterbed, it feels like they are participating," end quote. There was another meme, which is described in the affidavit as glorifying a person who kills and sexually abuses someone that no one will miss. And there was also a picture of a woman with duct tape over her mouth, and then the caption said, "Duct tape turning no, no, no into since 1942," end quote. Another image was captioned, "When she says, 'Choke me, daddy,' and you get carried away, and now she's dead," along with a screenshot of an image where a woman says she's tired but can't fall asleep, followed by a man choking her saying, "Good night, bitch." So, on February 21st, 2020, Matthew Farwell described pinning Sandra down during sex, and he asked her, quote, "Will you say, 'Matt, stop, I'm 13, I'm not ready for this, OMFG, please stop,' end quote. Text messages from this same year, 2020, also discuss a role-playing thing where Farwell asked Sandra to pretend as if he were her older brother coming into her room at night to have sex with her. A conversation between the two included Sandra telling Farwell that she listened better back then, and he replied, quote, "I wish it had been a year sooner after helping you study at the library. You still listen and give me whatever I want, baby," end quote. Sandra replied that she didn't even make Farwell wait to take her virginity for another year after studying in the library, and Farwell said, quote, "What was the first day you said, 'OMG, I want this guy to be my first, I want to feel him inside of me,' end quote. Sandra responded, quote, "Yeah, so 2012, I finally decided that I was going to try and find a way to fuck you and just wasn't sure how. How did you feel when I made your dream come true?" End quote. Farwell replied that he felt amazing and then said, quote, "I absolutely would have fucked you in 12, end quote. And Sandra, confused, responded with, in 12, question mark. She's like, what? In 12 what? And Farwell responded, 2012. Now remember, in 2013, when Sandra and Farwell had sex for the first time, she was 15, which would have made her 14 in 2012. And it's understandable that Sandra would have been confused by what Farwell meant when he said in 12, because she knew she was dealing with someone who had no qualms looking at literal children as sex objects, so she most likely wanted to clarify whether he meant in 2012 or when she was 12. That's the kind of person we're dealing with here. That's the kind of dynamic that we're dealing with here. On April 5th, 2020, Sandra told Farwell that she was glad she had let him take her virginity, and he agreed, saying, quote, LOL, if I had pushed, I absolutely could have fucked you without condoms from day one, end quote. And Sandra responded, quote, probably if you really pushed it, I was kind of scared to say no in the beginning, not knowing how you'd take it. So yeah, you would have gotten no condoms, LOL, end quote. This is very important. The fact that she says she was scared in the beginning, not knowing how he would take it, meaning she didn't really want to express exactly how she was feeling in the beginning of their sexual relationship. So maybe if she hadn't wanted to, or there were certain things that he wanted to do that she didn't want to do, she would have been afraid to vocalize that, not knowing how he would have reacted. And that's kind of where the uneven power dynamic thing comes in. Now, obviously, seeing the content of the text messages, Sandra knowing the exact day she lost her virginity to this much older man who married his wife the month after this happened, by the way. I don't know if I said that, but he took Sandra's virginity, and then the month after, he got married to the woman that he'd been dating while he took Sandra's virginity. So, yeah, that's crazy. But this is enough to prove that it did happen and when it happened. But in case you need more evidence, Sandra texted a friend on May 20th, 2020, and she mentioned how she had lost her virginity 5 days before the Boston Marathon bombing, which happened on April 15th, 2013. Now, it seemed that Matthew Farwell was engaging in this relationship with Sandra Birchmore, if not out in the open, then at least without a huge fear that he was going to be found out or that something bad would occur due to his connection with Sandra. And this went on for a while, but around 2019, Matthew Farwell suddenly became interested in privacy and secrecy, encouraging and directing Sandra to delete their conversations via texting and Facebook Messenger. On March 11th, he sent Sandra a message telling her, quote, make sure you clear all this out. And 8 days later, he and Sandra engaged in a sexual conversation, which at the end of, Farwell told Sandra he was going to bed and told her, quote, clear out this text. Several months later, on June 19th, Farwell instructed Sandra to delete all their texting and Facebook messages. And in another conversation about their first time together, and like I said, this reminiscing conversation happened a lot, Farwell says, quote, I never thought you'd let me, end quote. And Sandra responded, quote, I never thought you would, end quote, to which Farwell replied, quote, I wanted it so bad. Sandra told Farwell that she knew the day they'd made eye contact. She knew she wanted him, and he said, quote, you should have told me. We could have fucked so much sooner, end quote. Sooner than 15? Sooner than 15 years old, Matthew Farwell? Oh, a lot sooner? So much sooner? And then after he says this, he tells her, quote, clear that part out, baby, end quote. So you know what's wrong, right? You know what's wrong. And then Sandra tells him that she did, and he texts her back, good girl. This was all happening while the relationship was still very active. And not only that, during this time, Matthew Farwell made sure Sandra had her phone location turned on so that he could track her, and when she turned it off, he would get very upset. On March 11th, 2019, Farwell asked Sandra why her location was off, and a few days later, on March 22nd, Farwell asked Sandra where she was at. And when she said she was at 7-Eleven, he responded, you know, I don't know if you are at 7-Eleven. I know you're in Abington. And then he demanded to know why she was there in Abington when in Stoughton they had like 100 convenience stores. On April 22nd, 2019, Farwell sent Sandra a text message that said, quote, I know you're hiding shit. Your location is off again, end quote. This is almost more alarming than some of the sexual conversations, by the way. This need to track, to monitor, to control, to know where she is at all times, to question her, to basically attribute any behavior that he finds to be abnormal to her hiding something or doing something wrong when you're married, idiot. You're married, okay? And this is like a girl that you basically groomed from the time she was 15, and now you're consistently and constantly monitoring and controlling her, and you are telling her, like, oh, why are you in this town at 7-Eleven when the town we live in, Stoughton, has tons of convenience stores? It's almost like you can't go here unless I give you permission. And this happened again on June 22nd when Matthew Farwell sent Sandra a text asking her why her location had been off the other day. And then again on July 5th when Sandra received a text from Matthew Farwell which said, quote, "I see your location is off again," end quote. But strangely, just a year later, Matthew Farwell suddenly didn't seem too concerned with Sandra's location. And he told her in July of 2020, quote, "You can turn your location back off if you want," end quote. And Sandra responded, and she told Farwell her location wasn't off, and she wasn't sure why it wasn't showing up for him. And she said, quote, "Then I just unshared and reshared it with you. You can have it. It's been a thing for years, LOL," end quote, which means maybe she kind of enjoys it a little bit, or she's used to it. She likes the fact that he's monitoring her. In these toxic sort of dynamics, you think when somebody's being controlling and wants to know where you are, you equate that with them caring about you. But that's not what's happening there. Now, Farwell responded when she was like, "You can have my location, I'll turn it back on." He's like, "Big Brother's always watching." And Sandra expressed some confusion at this. He's like, "What?" She's like, "What do you mean? Big Brother's always watching?" And he replied, quote, "I'm just saying iPhones keep track of way too much stuff. I don't mean anything by it," end quote. Maybe Matthew Farwell was growing tired of Sandra and their lying games. Maybe all the lying and the hiding was getting exhausting. He was becoming paranoid, or maybe it was because he was living a double life and things in his main life with his wife and kids had become more complicated. Maybe it was just exhausting to keep this all going, to keep the lies going, the double life going. You're lying to your wife. You're lying to your family. You're lying to Sandra. You're lying to the people you work with. You're lying to everyone. It's exhausting. Not everybody can do it for that long. Honestly, I don't think a lot of people can. But definitely things with Matthew Farwell and his wife and his family had sort of intensified. On October 5th, 2020, Sandra Birchmore got some news that seemed to trigger a plan, which would put her on a collision course with a man who was so desperate to keep his secrets, and he may have been willing to kill for them. The news that Sandra got was received in text message form from a friend who informed Sandra that Matthew Farwell's wife was pregnant with their third child, and she was delivering this baby sometime in February 2021. Sandra told her friend that she was going to tell Farwell's wife about their relationship. She even wrote out like a draft text message as if it was going to the wife of Matthew Farwell, but she sent it to her friend instead, probably for approval, kind of like, "Oh, should I send this?" sort of thing. And the text said, quote, "I'm just messaging to inform you that your husband Matthew has been cheating on you since before you were even married," end quote. Sandra also reportedly texted this person, her friend, talking about how she and Farwell had been engaging in sexual activity for the last 10 years and that he had taken her virginity before she turned 16, which is the legal age of consent in Massachusetts, which it's not like, that still seems young. It still seems young to me, but, and I guess there's kind of like a gray area. It's a slippery slope. Like, I guess it is 16, but it's not even really super acceptable to see that. But definitely if you're before or below the age of 16, it's illegal and you can be, charged and prosecuted for it. Okay, so here's where things get very complicated. And I have to admit, weird and toxic from every angle you look at it. Everybody involved in this behaved in a very toxic, not healthy, not productive way. It seems that when Sandra Birchmore realized Matthew's wife was going to have another baby, she wanted to almost be on a level playing field with the wife. And so Sandra made a deal with Matthew Farwell. Some sources call it a deal. Others call it an ultimatum. I would probably lean to the latter myself, and you'll see why. Basically, Sandra told Matthew Farwell, "Listen, I'm not going to tell anyone that you had sex with me when I was 15. I won't tell anyone that you continue to have sex with me and you're doing it multiple times when you're on the clock and you're getting your salary from taxpayers. And I won't tell anyone that you're still having sex with me. All you have to do is agree to have unprotected sex with me and get me pregnant." Now, it appears that Farwell, realizing he had no other choice, agreed to this deal or ultimatum. And when I say he had no other choice, don't get it twisted. I'm speaking from his perspective. If he wanted to keep his life intact and keep his very dirty secrets buried, if he wanted to keep his wife and his kids and his job, he had no other choice. He could have taken accountability. He could have come clean to his wife and risked her leaving him. He could have come clean to his job and risked being fired and not being able to work as a police officer, at least in Massachusetts. He could have done a lot of things. but he didn't. And at that point, Sandra sent Farwell pictures of her ovulation schedule, and they discussed a sex schedule that would line up with when she was ovulating, which, if you don't know, ovulation is the time during a woman's cycle where she can get pregnant. So this was October 5th, and by October 12th, there was already arguments about the initial agreement, with Farwell texting Sandra, quote, "I said the agreement was once. That was our compromise," end quote. And Sandra responded back, quote, "I asked if we could try this month, didn't realize that meant you'd fuck me once, LOL. And then I asked if we could try through this year, and you said I'd think about it," end quote. Now you're going to see from here on out, Sandra's often trying to engage Matthew into conversations about their sex life, about their potential child together, their future together, and although in the past Farwell had been quite open during text exchanges, suddenly he wanted to have more of these conversations in person, meaning he didn't want a written record of these things. The next day, October 13th, Sandra and Farwell continue arguing about their agreement, and Farwell said, quote, "Our compromise was try once," end quote. Sandra wrote back, "Yeah, it was to try this month. So you're thinking about the second thing I said as far as the rest of the year?" Farwell wrote back bluntly, quote, "You said try once this month. If it happens, it's meant to be. Those are the exact words," end quote. Now, I don't know what came from this conversation or this discussion or this argument, but it's pretty clear to me that at this point, Sandra had Matthew Farwell by the balls, and he was going to do anything he needed to and agree to anything she wanted him to agree to in order to ensure that she would keep a secret, or maybe to buy himself time to figure out a more permanent solution. And you know what they say, two can keep a secret if one of them's dead. On November 3rd, 2020, Sandra broached the topic of getting pregnant again and asked Farwell if they could try again that month, but Farwell responded this was an in-person conversation. 2 days later, Sandra brought it up again, but she had more demands now. Sandra said, quote, "How would you feel about us having a baby, you being there, and signing the birth certificate? There's never going to be a need for your information anyway, so you'll be safe there. And I won't talk shit about her or your kids. You asked me the other day what I wanted, and I didn't want to give it to you in the form of an ultimatum, so I'm trying to do it with you as a compromise type of thing. Can you tell me what you thought of? I'm down for discussing it in person, but the more I thought of you signing, it really isn't going to have an impact on you because of the way things are going to fall in the future." Now, what did Sandra mean by the way things are going to fall in the future? I have no idea at this point. But it sounds like we're missing a lot of details. We're missing a lot because much of the details were removed from texting to in-person discussions, as Matthew Farwell wanted it. And basically Sandra's saying, listen, I'm not going to talk shit about your wife. I'm not going to talk shit about your kids. I'm not going to tell anybody, but now I want you to not only get me pregnant, but be there when I give birth and sign the birth certificate, like with your name. And she's somehow trying to convince him that this isn't going to affect him in any way because of the way things are going to fall in the future. But I mean, I think that anybody understands having your name legally on the birth certificate of a child does affect you, where it's like you're now responsible for this child legally, financially, in every way. And if you later wanted to come back and say, oh, I don't think that's my child, et cetera, they have to do paternity tests. There's a whole song and dance that has to happen. So it's actually a very serious thing to put your name on the birth certificate of a child. And I guess I'm just not sure exactly what Sandra meant by that, except for the fact that she wants what she wants. She wants him to be the father of her child, and she wants him to take responsibility and ownership of her and that child, even though he's married with 2 children and a third on the way. And Matthew Farwell is getting very uncomfortable with these conversations. And every time she broaches the subject or brings it up in texting, he's like, let's talk about that in person. And this is how Matthew Farwell starts to respond to all of Sandra's questions. On November 5th, he said, that's an in-person discussion, end quote, when discussing whether he was going to sign the birth certificate, whether he was going to be there when she gave birth. And according to the probable cause affidavit, Farwell continued to meet with Sandra in person, and messages between them suggested they were still very much sexually active, which eventually did lead to Sandra Birchmore becoming pregnant. On December 28, 2020, Sandra sent Matthew Farwell a poster she had drawn, and she decorated it with stickers and glitter, and it said, "Congratulations, we're going to be parents, 2021. I'm not sure what Sandra expected Farwell's reaction to be. I think it's very clear, even just from the interactions we're seeing, and I don't know how he's behaving with her in private. Maybe he's love bombing the shit out of her in private, and maybe he's like, oh, I can't wait to have a child with you, and this is so exciting. I don't know, but in texting, from what we see, Matthew Farwell does not seem to be keen on the idea of getting Sandra pregnant to begin with. And he's kind of like, this is a deal, this is an ultimatum, this is something that you're sort of forcing me into. So I don't know why she kind of thought he would be happy and excited. Maybe she thought when it became real, he'd come around. I don't know the context of their relationship, but needless to say, the man was not over the moon to find out he was going to become a daddy again twice in the space of just a few months with 2 different women. And he replied back, quote, "I literally have nothing to say right now. How could you express that in text when I said I don't appreciate it?" End quote. Matthew asked Sandra how far along she was, and she replied that it didn't matter. Regardless of how many weeks she was pregnant, they were keeping the baby. Sandra then texted, quote, 3.5 weeks, which means I conceived this month, end quote. Farwell responded that they needed to talk then, to which Sandra replied, quote, "No shit, that's obvious, and the birth certificate is being signed, or hers isn't," end quote. Now that she's officially pregnant and confirmed to be pregnant, Sandra seems less iffy about doling out ultimatums and, kind of bringing Matthew Farwell's wife into this, which I don't find to be a good move. It doesn't really bode well. It doesn't speak well to the whole situation because Matthew Farwell's wife is an innocent victim in this as well. She doesn't know what her husband's doing. She's being betrayed and lied to by him just like Sandra is. So to kind of have her say like, well, you're not signing your wife's, the child of your wife's birth certificate unless you're signing ours as well. I get it. I get why she feels that way, but I don't know exactly what she thinks this relationship between herself and Matthew Farwell is. So there's some arguing after this, and Sandra said that she was mad about how Matthew was acting over a choice that they'd both made, and Matthew Farwell replied, quote, "I'm mad you act like you gave anyone a choice," end quote. And Sandra wrote back, quote, "LMAO, oh, so you didn't have a choice," end quote. And Farwell wrote back, quote, "Per usual, you make and do whatever you want," end quote. And Sandra replied, quote, "All I did was say, can I have it? And you said, have what?" And I said, you know what I'm asking for. And you stood up and said, yeah, you've been doing that. You mad she's due in February and I'm in September, and you don't know how you're going to be there for both of us. And you need to be there during labor for me too, because your kid should matter. End quote. At that time, Matthew Farwell's wife was 8 months pregnant and due in early February. So to this, Farwell replied, quote, "You are truly the worst person on the face of the earth," end quote. Reportedly at this time, Sandra reminded Matthew about the secrets she was holding for him. The affidavit says she threatened to expose the truth about their past and ongoing sexual relationship. Farwell wrote in response to this, quote, "For the past week and a half, the doctor wasn't right, but now she was, and you just throw it at me because now you've got me. You honestly have no idea how to treat people. I have fucking bent over backwards for you. Now you want to act like this was some free will decision. You have threatened me from the word go. If I didn't do and give you what you wanted, you would ruin me. I made a deal with you and you changed the terms at every turn. We will deal with this tomorrow," end quote. So yeah, not great. Not great dynamics, especially on the day that you announce to your partner, I guess, if in this case, is he really her partner? No. But you announce to the person you're having sex with, hey, we're having a baby, right? And this is the kind of conversation you're having in the aftermath. Not great. It's not good. It's not good. So the next day, it appears that Sandra and Matthew met to talk in person. Things between them became physical. This wasn't the first time that things became physical between them, because several people who knew Sandra would later tell police that Sandra had mentioned Farwell putting his hands on her before. Sandra texted Matthew Farwell saying, quote, "It made me really uncomfortable and stressed out and scared when you were next to me because I thought you were going to hit me after you said what you said and took things out of my hand. That's why I was crying. I know you wouldn't, but it still scared me," end quote. Now keep in mind that Sandra Birchmore stood no taller than 4'10", very short little girl, while Matthew Farwell is a towering 6'4". There's a large size disparity here, along with other complicated power dynamics. And yes, somebody who's so physically imposing when you are not is going to be scary. But Sandra's saying here, I know you wouldn't hurt me, but I was scared regardless. Now, that's something that I really think a lot of young people and young women especially need to be aware of. You cannot believe that you're safe with someone else, especially a man, unless you truly and genuinely feel safe. And I'm talking about what's your gut saying, what's your instinct saying. If you felt scared, if you felt in his presence that he would hurt you, but you're like, oh, like logically, I know you wouldn't. No, you need to listen to your gut at that point. If you think that this person could potentially hurt you and you feel scared, it's because you're actually not safe with him. And that's something that I hope everybody who's listening to, male, female, young, old, whatever, you really understand that your gut and your instincts are your greatest power. And you do not know that you're safe with somebody unless you can actually and genuinely feel safe with them. And if you're not safe with them, there's always going to be something in you, whether it's your instincts, whether it's your, guardian angel, what have you, that's telling you or screaming at you at some points, this is not a safe person to be around. Please listen to that voice, wherever it's coming from. At least keep it in mind. So Sandra's friends said that leading up to her death in the weeks before, she was really excited about the baby and about becoming a mother. And she threw herself wholeheartedly into planning for her future with her child, with herself, and kind of even with Matthew Farwell. So Sandra talked with friends about what kind of clothes the baby would need, since the baby was going to be born during the winter or kind of like, late fall when it's not super warm. And she began reducing her caffeine intake. She went shopping for clothes and baby accessories with friends and started thinking about a pregnancy announcement and a baby shower and newborn photo shoots. But she confessed to her friends and some of her family that the baby's father was not so excited. She called a friend in January of 2021 and said that when she had told Matthew about the baby, he told her that he wished she would just die and he wanted nothing to do with her or their baby. She said he then put her in a headlock and wrenched her cell phone from her hand. Sandra told another friend that Farwell had gotten angry when she showed him the sonogram and he pushed her to the ground, telling her, quote, "That's not my child. I don't want anything really to do with you," end quote. This same person said that Sandra was not happy about this and she did seem scared, but she wasn't ready to leave Matthew Farwell because he'd been such a big part of her life for so long. In a text message to another friend, Sandra reported that Matthew had taken her cell phone away from her 3 times and refused to give it back. He also used his body to shove her. But this did not stop Sandra from continuing to ask Matthew Farwell for more. And I'm not blaming her in any way. It doesn't matter what somebody does to you. Killing someone is illegal. Matthew Farwell had every right to be annoyed by this, to be angry about this, even if he's completely wrong, right? Which he was. He started a relationship with this girl, when she was 15. And continued this relationship for a decade. So, and kind of went along with this whole plan to get pregnant. He's 100% wrong. Both things can be true. He can be wrong, and then she can be handling the situation wrong. But the fact that, if he's charged and accused of killing her, but if he did kill her, that's not the way to handle it, no matter what she did. So he's the most wrong. But I do want to acknowledge that this isn't the way to handle the situation on either part. So on January 3rd, Sandra asked Farwell if the baby could take his last name. She said, quote, "So I have a compromise for you. You don't need to sign the birth certificate if the baby can have your last name," end quote. Farwell replied and said, surprise, surprise, he was not open to discussing this over text and that they should talk about it in person. On January 4th, Sandra said she was going to the doctor the following day and she asked Matthew if he wanted to know how it went. The next day, Sandra texted Farwell and asked him to come over because they had things to discuss, like what she and her doctor had talked about, when her next ultrasound would be, and what her estimated due date was. On January 6th, Sandra said, quote, "1, you don't have to sign the birth certificate if I'm allowed to at least list you and they can have your name, and I won't move to Stoughton. 2, I won't bitch about holidays, but I would like you to come a few days before Christmas and Easter so you can see what they get from me, and I don't want you to leave them out. And 3, if you want to try and support them, we can talk about that, but I do want you to see them. I feel like I'm trying to be as fair as I can, and I want you there for my labor. That I'm standing my ground on," end quote. So when Sandra's saying them, I want you to be there for them. I want you to come on Christmas so you can see what I get them. She's speaking about a singular person, the child of her and Matthew Farwell. She just doesn't know if it's a boy or a girl yet, so she's saying them. Now, Farwell replied that they could talk about it in person, and Sandra replied, "Yeah, I figured." But then she's like, "Does this sound okay to you?" And then Farwell said, quote, "It's a lot to think about. It's so much more than you've ever asked for," end quote. Which is fair, right? It is. It's so much more than she's ever asked for. And she's continually kind of upping the ante, which, once again, not blaming her, but it's increasing the pressure on this man who she's already said, "I kind of don't feel safe with you. Like, I know you're not going to hurt me, but I don't feel safe with you." It's like when you're in front of an angry bear, you're supposed to sort of, I guess, with some bears, I don't know. Like, let's say you're in front of an angry animal, a lion. You're better off playing dead and not poking the bear, poking the lion. You don't want to throw rocks at the lion and be like, "Hey, I kind of feel scared, like you could hurt me, but I know you won't because you're not right now, but, I'm going to kind of just push my luck and see what happens." Like, what she's doing here is she's increasing the pressure, increasing the intensity on him, which is eventually going to drive him to do something fueled from desperation. So he's like, yes, this is so much more than you've ever asked for. And to this, Sandra retorted, quote, and still less than what any other girl would ask for, end quote. So things reached a boiling point on January 20th when the Stoughton Police Department received a phone call from someone who knew Sandra Birchmore. Apparently this person was a friend or something at one point, and this person was reporting to the police that Sandra had done something to them. But in the process of reporting this, they also mentioned that Sandra had been having a sexual relationship with Stoughton police officer Matthew Farwell. And the person who took the call, the employee at the police station, claimed they wrote down the caller's info and then passed the information on to Matthew Farwell, who became extremely angry and pissed off and ordered the employee to not speak about the call to anyone and never talk about it again. Farwell then began texting Sandra, quote, dude, your fucking friend called my job, Sandra, WTF, end quote. Sandra replied back with one single question mark, and Farwell wrote, quote, your friend just called my work to complain about me, WTF, end quote. Sandra replied with IDK, to which Farwell responded, quote, what do you mean you don't know, end quote. Sandra said she'd just woken up, like she has no idea what's going on. And Farwell asked, did you steal something from this person? Like, why is she saying this? What's going on? And he said, quote, you also told me that no one knew about us. Yes, she claimed we are fucking, end quote. Sandra said back, quote, it's literally nothing, end quote. And Farwell replied, quote, it's not nothing. She called my job. That's insane. Why would she call and drop my fucking name, Sandra? Like, what do I have to do with you not giving her something? Like, you have no idea how bad what she did is. I literally can't believe this is even real life. Like, what else do I have to worry about now? Which other friend will do something tomorrow, end quote. So now Matthew Farwell's feeling a little bit like the cat's out of the bag, right? He wasn't really ever trying to hide this, but he wasn't trying to be careful about it. And it seemed that he did sort of trust Sandra to an extent where he didn't think she would throw him under the bus or put him in danger. And now he's realizing, like, maybe this wasn't as secret as I thought it was. Maybe she's been telling more people what's going to come now, what's happening now, how many people know. And he's getting maybe a little paranoid, a little scared, a little nervous, or a lot. But over the course of the month of January, Matthew Farwell seemed to calm down. His anger faded, and he appeared to be much more amenable to the idea of Sandra's pregnancy. At least that's what Sandra believed and what she told her friends. And in my opinion, when this person who knew Sandra called the police department and told them about Sandra and Matthew, that's when Matthew made the decision that he was going to kill her. And that's why he seemed to be calmer. He got angry, and then he said in his head, this is never going to stop. This is never going to go away unless I kill her. And that's when he started planning that. And so he seemed calm because he was just basically behaving in a way to appease Sandra to get to the point where he could kill her and she wouldn't suspect it. On January 24th, Sandra Birchmore texted a friend and told this person that the father of her child had done a complete 180. And when her friend asked if the change was good or bad, Sandra replied, quote, good, but unexpected. So it kind of threw me off and made me a little uncomfortable, but that's because of how things were going. He asked me if I'd give him a key and said that if I kept it a secret, he'll be around and see them and all that. So it's getting somewhere. And then he looked in my closet and then the bathroom, but I don't know why. I haven't figured that out yet. We started heart to heart, then work called him, so he had to leave. Oh, and he brought me ginger ale because I ran out, end quote. When the friend asked about the birth certificate, like, well, is he going to sign it? Sandra said that she thought Farwell was going to sign it, but she wasn't sure. He would be back that week for them to discuss it further. A lot of important things happened in that text exchange, one of which was the fact that Matthew Farwell apparently wanted a key to Sandra's apartment, right? That's what she told her friend, that her boyfriend, her cop married boyfriend, wants a key to his apartment. And this was a big change because Sandra had moved into that Canton, Massachusetts apartment from Stoughton recently. And when this has happened, Farwell had told her, like, it probably wasn't the best idea for him to have a key to her new apartment. But now he wanted one. And not only that, he wanted the code to get into Sandra's apartment building. On January 24th, Sandra texted Matthew Farwell the code to her building, and she told him she had a copy of her key for him as well. Records from Walmart show that at 11:10 that morning, Sandra had paid $2 to have a copy of her apartment key made, so we know she was telling the truth. Sandra talked about this change in Farwell and his request for a key to another friend that day, saying, quote, but he did admit that I do have the upper hand in the situation, which isn't a good thing, but I'm trying to and not be that person, if you know what I mean, end quote. And her friend's like, yeah, I know what you mean. You don't want to be that person, but I mean, you do have the upper hand here, in a way, right? In a way. But do you really have the upper hand when you put a bad man's desperate back to a wall? Sandra also mentioned Matthew Farwell bringing over this ginger ale, which she'd asked him to do, and her friend replied that he was, quote, coming around, to which Sandra said, quote, a lot more than I thought he was going to. Yes, I still have to verify the PIN for him to get into the apartment if he rings me and I don't answer, but last night he opened my closet door for something, and then he went into my bathroom, looking at my bathroom, and then I have a dolly in my living room, and he asked me why I had it. It was just really odd. He started looking around. I don't know, end quote. So Matthew Farwell came into Sandra's apartment, and he did something he'd clearly never done before because Sandra herself pointed out that it was odd. He started looking at her closet and in her bathroom, and keep in mind, the door of this closet is going to be the very same door that Sandra is going to be found hanging off of 12 days later with the strap of a gym bag around her neck. It was odd to Sandra because she couldn't think of a reason Farwell would be so interested in her bedroom and her bathroom and her closet. She couldn't fathom that his actual motive would and could be so nefarious. He was scouting out places he could stage her death right then and there as he's bringing her ginger ale for her pregnancy nausea. On January 30th, Sandra texted Farwell asking if they could discuss baby names, and Farwell said, did you guess it? They could talk about it in person. That's an in-person conversation. Baby names, in-person conversation. Over the next few days, Sandra started making plans for the birth of her child. She was looking into who would take care of her cats when she was in the hospital in labor. She was planning an official pregnancy announcement, which would drop on February 14th, Valentine's Day, and also in the very same month that Matthew Farwell's wife would be giving birth to her newest child. Sandra wanted to do a baby shower and a gender reveal. She Googled topics about parenting and pregnancy. She scheduled another OB appointment for February 10th, and she shot Matthew Farwell a text asking if he would help shovel her car out during the upcoming snowstorm their area was expecting. The 2021 Groundhog Day nor'easter was a powerful, severe, and erratic storm that impacted much of the northeastern United States, with large metropolitan areas like Boston and New York City receiving as much as 18 to 24 inches of snow accumulation from January 31st to February 2nd. And this made it the worst snowstorm to affect the area since a blizzard in January 2016. The city of Boston, not far from Canton, where Sandra Birchmore lived, declared a state of emergency ahead of the storm. They shut down schools as well as many businesses. Everyone in the area knew that storm was coming, including Matthew Farwell, who decided to use the snow to his advantage. According to prosecutors, Farwell chose February 1st as the day Sandra Birchmore would die because he knew that the storm would give him an extra few days before her body was discovered. February 1st was a busy day for Sandra. At 12:19 p.m., she texted Matthew Farwell and told him that she was being released from her job. She worked at a local public school as a teacher's aide. They were getting released early that day due to the storm rolling in. Sandra also told Farwell that she'd received an early baby gift in the mail that day, but she was planning a baby shower for March because of the COVID pandemic. Sandra told Farwell that once they found out whether they were having a boy or a girl, she wanted him to purchase an outfit for their baby to wear home from the hospital. At 1:25 p.m., Sandra was chatting with a photographer about scheduling a newborn photo shoot. At 5:01 p.m., surveillance cameras at Sandra's apartment captured her getting a DoorDash delivery. And then at 5:31 and 5:33 p.m., Sandra was seen outside briefly with a snow brush, brushing her car off. 5:33 p.m. is the last time Sandra Birchmore is seen alive. But we know that she was alive for at least a few more hours because she was inside of her apartment and she was texting a friend about baby clothes at 7:57 p.m. At 8:25 p.m., Sandra was searching the internet for baby furniture for a baby room. And then at 9:08 p.m., she received a text from Matthew Farwell asking if he could stop over for a second. At 9:10 p.m., Sandra replied and told him the door to her apartment was unlocked. So he's got the code to the building. He can just come in when he gets there. This was the last text that Sandra would ever send. At 9:14 p.m., a man wearing a dark hoodie pulled up over his head and a medical face mask, the kind you were wearing during COVID. He entered Sandra's apartment building using a PIN code. And 28 minutes later, at 9:43 p.m., the same man exited the apartment using the elevator and then left the building. And then Sandra's apartment and her cell phone was quiet, with no activity, until 3 days later on February 4th, when the Canton Police Department performed a wellness check after Sandra's employer reported she hadn't shown up for work in a few days. The police found Sandra dead. Her body was seated on the floor in a reclined position with one end of a duffel bag strap around the closet doorknob, the other end wrapped around her neck. Sandra was wearing the same clothing she'd been seen wearing on surveillance on February 1st, and her cell phone was on the floor about 12 inches from her right hand and 6 inches from her bent right knee. When investigators recovered her cell phone, they found that it had been locked from 9:13 p.m. until the device powered off due to loss of battery on February 3rd. So from 9:13 p.m. on February 1st, after she texted Matthew Farwell and was like, come on in, until it died, the battery died on February 3rd, nobody touched that phone. But health data on the iPhone actually showed that the last movement recorded by the phone was 8 steps registered at 9:40 p.m., 3 minutes before Matthew Farwell was seen on surveillance leaving her apartment building. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that is next episode. But this day, February 1st, also happened to be the exact day that Farwell's wife was delivering their child that night. The same night that Sandra Birchmore was murdered. So 2 days later, Matthew Farwell would be interviewed by the state police, and he would do a lot of lying during that in-person conversation. He admitted to having a sexual relationship with Sandra, but he told police that it had started in 2020, not 2013, which of course they would figure out from Sandra's phone that this wasn't true. He also said that they'd only had sex 2 or 3 times in the past year, he and Sandra. But once again, data from Sandra's phone showed that the two had been physical no less than 10 times between January 1st of 2020 and February 1st of 2021. Many of these interactions happened while Farwell was on the clock as a police officer. Farwell also claimed that he'd tried to end things with Sandra, or at least that he'd been trying to distance himself, and the last time they'd had sex was in October of 2020, which meant he could not possibly be the father of Sandra's child. But Sandra had text messages on her phone from November showing that Farwell was coming over to engage in sexual activity with her to purposely get her pregnant, right? So they figured out that was a lie, too. On top of that, Matthew Farwell would allow the state police only partial access to his cell phone. On February 9th, while the state police still had his personal cell phone, Farwell used his police-issued phone to make and delete 2 Google searches. Quote, can deleted messages be recovered by Celebrite? And, quote, can you revoke consent in Massachusetts? The Celebrite, for any of you who don't know, it's a way to basically extract data from a phone. When I worked at Verizon, we used it to transfer data from one cell phone to another. The police use it for forensics to extract text messages. Even sometimes deleted things can be found. And that's what a Celebrite is for. So this is all looking pretty bad for Matthew Farwell. But within just a few months, it would be revealed that whatever happened with Sandra Birchmore was far more nefarious and went far deeper than just one police officer grooming her from a young age. The Stoughton Police Department would conduct an internal investigation, and this would reveal that there were at least 2 other men involved. Farwell's own brother, William Farwell, Matthew Farwell's twin brother, and then Robert Devine, the head of the now, at this point, defunct Explorers program in Stoughton. All police officers, okay? And that's where we're going to pick up next time. There's still so much to talk about, so much to discuss. This rabbit hole goes very deep, so join me next time where we talk about all of that, as well as Sandra's autopsy, the original medical examiner who claimed that Sandra's death had been self-inflicted, even though a later forensic pathologist would reach a completely different conclusion. And this whole thing has led many people in the true crime community to believe that there is some larger network of enablers at work, and that there could be a cover-up going on in Stoughton, Massachusetts, in law enforcement, the medical examiner. Because why would this medical examiner look at what happened to Sandra Birchmore and say, definitely self-inflicted, she did this to herself, and then a forensic pathologist looks at it and is like, I have no idea how this ME ever came to this conclusion. This girl did not take her own life. So that is what we're going to talk about next time. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it, share it if you think it's worth sharing, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for being here. Stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe, and I'll see you very, very soon. Bye.